Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry.
It is not good enough to talk about great ideas. They're important. But nothing happens unless people look around them and say, you know what, this status quo is not working. It's not just, it's not right, it's not fair. But I want you to think about this. Think about real change in America.
We cannot go back to the old ways. We have got to go forward with a new and progressive agenda.
The labor movement was created when millions of workers stood up and said, you know what, you're going to treat us with dignity and respect. We're going to have collective bargaining. It wasn't somebody on the top who made that decision. The civil rights movement did not occur because somebody in the White House said, you know, maybe we'll allow African Americans in the South to vote. Maybe we'll end segregation. I think it's a great idea. That's not how it happened. It happened when millions of people stood up and said, we will no longer accept racism and segregation in America.
I am proud to stand with the working families of our country, prepared to take on the powerful special interest. That is what I did yesterday. That is what I did 25 years ago. That is what I'll do tomorrow. I come from the working class of this country. I will be damned if we will allow the Republican Party, whose job is to represent the rich and the powerful, to win the votes of working class Americans.
If you're watching this video, you already know how important it is to make Bernie Sanders our Democratic nominee and our next president. Every single person watching this video has something on the line in this election. It could be that you or someone in your family can't afford the medical care they need, or you're struggling with student debt. You might live in fear of being deported, or of sending your child to school in the morning because of the constant threat of gun violence in this country. And all of us live in an economy that for too long has served the interests of the billionaires and not the 99%. And all of us live under the threat of catastrophic climate change, with time running out to act. We all know that Bernie is the candidate who will confront each of these challenges with solutions that are actually commensurate with the scale of the problems. We also all know that Bernie is the strongest candidate to take on and defeat Donald Trump, because he's the best candidate to motivate the tens of millions of Americans who the pollsters call unlikely voters, who feel that the political system has failed them. Trump won in 2016 because too many Democrats in key battleground states stayed home. And we're not going to beat Trump in 2020 without generating massive enthusiasm to bring those same voters out to the polls. If we want them to be enthusiastic, we have to give them something to be enthusiastic about. And Bernie is the one who can do that, who's willing to tell the truth about what's broken in this country, who will give people a strong reason to vote and to volunteer and to make sure that we defeat Donald Trump. That's why we know that if we can make Bernie the Democratic nominee, he will defeat Donald Trump and become our next president. But we have to win the Democratic nomination first. And that's a big challenge we can't underestimate. That's why we're taking the time to tell you about our roadmap to winning the Democratic nomination. In this video, we're going to tell you what our strategy is in a level of detail we've never disclosed before. We can't tell you everything because there are some plans and specific details that are important to keep within the campaign. Also, certain things may change over time. But we're going to tell you far more than most campaigns otherwise would, because we want you to understand why we're going to ask you to do many of the things we're asking you to do over the coming months and weeks. Let's start with an overview of the Democratic presidential nominating process. To win the Democratic nomination, Bernie will need to win a majority of delegates when they vote at the Democratic National Convention next July in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The final number of delegates has not yet been determined, but it's estimated that it'll be 4,747. Those 4,747 break down into two categories. First, there are pledged delegates. Pledged delegates are sent to the convention based on how each candidate does in their state's primary or caucus. When we battle for votes in each state, our goal isn't just to win that state for Bernie, but to win pledged delegates who will attend the Democratic National Convention in July and cast their votes for Bernie. There are 3,979 pledged delegates. There are also 768 automatic delegates, commonly known as superdelegates, who go to the convention as members of Congress, Democratic governors, DNC members, and other distinguished party leaders like former presidents. You may remember superdelegates from 2016 or 2008 or past elections. Thanks to some changes put in place after 2016, those 768 superdelegates only get to vote on the Democratic nominee if we get to the convention and no candidate wins a majority of the pledged delegates on the first vote. In that case, all the delegates would vote until one candidate wins a majority. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about what might happen at the convention under those circumstances. All you need to know for the time being is that our campaign is preparing for that unlikely scenario, and in the meantime, the surest way to make sure that Bernie becomes our nominee is to help Bernie win a majority of pledged delegates by winning state by state. So let's talk about state by state primaries and caucuses where the pledged delegates will be awarded. First, the order is important here. One of the most important things we want you to understand about our strategy from this video is that the earliest states in the calendar are the most important states, not the biggest states. What happens in the first few primary contests will have a huge impact on the race. You might think that because we need to win the most delegates, we should focus on the biggest states that have the most delegates at stake. But actually, we need to focus on the earliest states most of all, because the candidates who win will build momentum that they can carry into later states, while the candidates who lose will be winnowed out. That's why our goal is to win as many of the early states as possible. So let's talk about state-by-state primaries and caucuses where the pledged delegates will be awarded. The Iowa caucus is the first nomination contest in the nation. If you're not sure what a caucus is, it's basically an event where people vote in big public groups in community spaces, high school gymnasiums, and other places, town by town, across the entire state, all at once on one night. Who wins or does well in the Iowa caucus is extremely important. Campaigns often remark that there are only 2 or 3 tickets out of Iowa, meaning that everyone who finishes lower is soon to be eliminated from the race. That's why you may have seen Bernie and every other presidential candidate spending so much time in Iowa, the Iowa State Fair, state party events, having rallies, etc. This year, the Iowa caucus will happen on Monday, February 3rd. Then comes New Hampshire, which is the first primary election in the nation, on Tuesday, February 11th. If you remember 2016, Bernie won New Hampshire by the highest vote margin in history, 22 points. Next, on February 22nd, we have the Nevada caucus. And finally, the South Carolina primary on Saturday, February 29th. Those 4 states combined in February account for only 155 of the 3,979 pledged delegates, 3.9%. But who wins in each of those states could have huge impacts on the overall direction of the race. Some candidates may drop out if they don't win any delegates and start to run out of money. And polling done before the first 4 states often changes dramatically compared to polling done afterwards, because voters in future states may switch who they're planning on supporting based on whether they think their first choice candidate actually will be able to win. That brings us to our next big day, Tuesday, March 3rd, which is known as Super Tuesday. A lot of states and territories are voting on that day. Alabama, American Samoa, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, and Virginia. That's a long list, and some of those states are large, and yes, they have a lot of delegates at stake. California has the most of any state in the entire calendar. Texas has the 3rd most delegates total on Super Tuesday. That's more than 1/3 of the total pledged delegates, all in one day. It's very possible that one candidate could emerge from Super Tuesday with a huge delegate lead and become a frontrunner. Or Super Tuesday could be the point that the nomination narrows to a 2-person contest and voters choose between the strongest remaining candidates. We aren't going to speculate too much right now about what might happen if there's still an active battle for the nomination into the rest of March after Super Tuesday and beyond, because this video is intended to give you strategic guidance and clear action items for how to maximize Bernie's chances before all the primaries and caucuses begin. We'll give you more up-to-date campaign strategy when and if that time comes. The most important thing you need to understand now is that if you want Bernie to be our nominee, it's essential to join this movement and help us win as many states and delegates as possible early on in the process. If you're in an important early state, we're going to ask you to get involved in our on-the-ground field programs in those states. And if you're not in one of those states, we're going to ask you to help us win those important early states from wherever you are in the country. That's how we start 2020 with momentum, so that as we move through the rest of the primary calendar, we can win again and again, state by state, and go on to make Bernie our Democratic nominee and our next president.
Okay, so now we understand the big picture of how we win this election, and we know that the stakes are high in the early states. I want to cover how we approach talking to voters. When talking to people about participating in the election, there are two key parts. One, persuading people to vote or caucus for your candidate who might otherwise support another candidate or who are currently undecided. And two, turning people out to vote or caucus who don't usually participate in elections. When it comes to persuasion, sharing our own stories about why we support Bernie is key. Research has shown that when two people enter an argument or debate, both parties usually come out more committed to their prior beliefs than before. In other words, rational debate is not an effective tool for persuasion. That's why instead of arguing, we always come back to sharing our own stories and motivations. We share what motivates us as individuals to vote and volunteer for Bernie Sanders. This opens the door for others to resonate with our motivations. Sharing familiar and relatable parts of your own story is key. Talking about your own struggle with student debt or with the healthcare system is so much more powerful than an abstract policy argument. While we share our stories, it's also important to ask people what matters to them. I like to ask people, what's something affecting your family or your community that you wish one of the candidates would take a stand on? This opens up a real conversation for you to listen to the other person about what's at stake for them. Now we're gonna think about how to actually have these persuasive conversations. Think about somebody you know. Think about what's important to them. Think about what you would say to them about why you support Bernie, why you're passionate enough about Bernie to volunteer. I would share honestly that I remember when I started to understand the climate crisis and how that roots me in supporting Bernie Sanders. When I was 12, sitting in my living room, there was a major heat wave in Pennsylvania, and it was too hot to go outside. I had this clenching feeling in my stomach that this was gonna last forever. The heat wave ended, but summers have gotten hotter and hotter. Hurricanes more and more severe. I know that Bernie Sanders is the only presidential candidate with a plan to pass a Green New Deal to take on climate change and create 20 million good union jobs. And so I'd end with asking, what is something affecting your family or your community that you wish one of the candidates would take a stand on? We also at times have to contrast with the other candidates in the race, following the lead of our campaign and of Bernie. When I was home a few weeks ago, I had a conversation with somebody who was dead set on Joe Biden being the only candidate with a shot to beat Trump. I listened, agreeing that beating Trump was key, but I also shared some important information about Joe Biden. I said, did you know that Joe Biden told a room full of Wall Street billionaire donors that nothing would fundamentally change if he became president? I'm for Bernie because he does think we need major change. Bernie has always stood up to the powerful, opposed corruption, and fought for ordinary people. Our campaign is not funded by wealthy corporate interests, but by millions of small donations from people like us. Bernie will make sure that Wall Street, insurance companies, and pharmaceutical companies, and billionaires like Donald Trump no longer run our government. Don't you agree that that's what's really important? Sharing that information about Joe Biden with the person that I knew made them actually reconsider if Joe Biden was the best person in this moment, when people are disappointed with corporations, are disappointed with the bailouts that the banks are getting. It was really helpful for me to share a little bit about why Joe Biden might not be the best candidate. It is shown that having meaningful one-to-one conversations can absolutely transform who a voter supports, but only if we listen and connect. Instead of debating, we have to share our stories about why we support Bernie. Turning people out to vote is also key. Did you know that only 55% of eligible voters cast a ballot in the 2016 election? Now, before we get angry, let's ask ourselves why people don't vote. It's really easy to say, well, people don't care, and that's why they don't vote. But do you actually think that people don't care? People don't turn out to vote because they don't feel inspired, because they work 2, 3, 4 jobs. Our role is to inspire people to vote. There are literally millions of people out there who would vote for Bernie, but might not cast their ballots unless we engage them. We increase turnout when we have conversations with voters, where they feel heard, not condescended to. We should never shame somebody for not voting. Our electoral system is broken, and it's understandable that people don't feel excited to vote. That's why it's our job to talk to people about why joining the movement to elect Bernie Sanders is about much more than winning an election. It's about transforming this country. We all will spend time this election talking to our friends, family, and community about voting. And we'll spend time talking to people we don't know across the country about turning out to vote. To recap, we're going to ask you to have 2 main types of conversations with voters. The first one is persuasion, where you talk to undecided voters or voters considering other candidates and ask them to support Bernie. And turnout, where you reach out to people who support Bernie, but who may be unlikely to vote unless you make sure they're registered and know when and how to vote or caucus. It's pretty simple math. The more people we have meaningful conversations with about Bernie, the more people that will turn out to vote and caucus for him. Some of those people might be people we know personally, from our own lives and communities. People we have personal relationships with are even more likely to listen to what we have to say when it comes from a heartfelt place. Other people we'll talk to are people we don't know, voters who we reach on the phones, the doors, or over text, and through our campaign in other ways. And the first people that we should all spend time talking to are the voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, and also key Super Tuesday states. That's how we're going to win this nomination and presidency for Bernie. I can't wait to do it with all of you.
So to start, we all know that the majority of people in America support policies like the Green New Deal, Medicare for All, and free college. So collectively, we are personally connected to these millions of people. They are our friends and our classmates, our coworkers and our family members. Just like Becca outlined earlier, we need to make sure that we are turning out the Bernie supporters that we know to vote or caucus and persuade the people that we know who are on the fence about Bernie. We call this friend-to-friend organizing, and it is a critical part of how we are going to put Bernie in the White House. Now, the good news is that you are the most powerful and effective messenger to turn out, persuade, and recruit the people that you know to volunteer with our campaign. Yes, you. There is so much at stake in this election that so many voters are looking to the people in their lives for guidance on how to choose the right candidate. So I would tell my younger sister, Christina, for example, that one of the reasons why I support Bernie is because he believes that everyone should have health care. So with Bernie in the White House, our parents who didn't have health care for most of their life would never have to worry about seeing the doctor or any medical debt. With Bernie in the White House, our parents who didn't have health care for most of their lives would never have to worry about seeing the doctor or ever worry about medical debt. So you most definitely have people in your life that you can persuade, just like how I can persuade my sister. And so all of us must commit to having thoughtful, intentional, and ongoing conversations with the people in our lives. Friend-to-friend organizing is especially powerful for students, or if you're part of an organization like a mosque or a church, union, or community organization. This may be because you may interact with a big group of people regularly, and also you have a shared experience or identity. And this shared identity or experience makes you a credible messenger. Now, at this point, I hope you all understand the power and the responsibility that all of us have to talk to the people that we know. Just like we need to canvass voters by making phone calls and knocking on doors, we need to canvass the people in our own lives. Have you ever knocked on doors or made phone calls for a campaign before? Okay, awesome. So as you know, you get a list of people from the public voter file that you need to either call or knock their door on. And then you're able to track the conversation either using an app or by paper and pen. Well, believe it or not, until now, there has never been any real way for a campaign to do this. So this is why our campaign developed our revolutionary campaign app, Burn. The Burn app allows you to be the point person for your personal list of voters. So what you would do is you would build a list of all the people that you know, track the conversations that you have with them, and give your friends important information about how they register and how they vote.
First, I log how my friends are feeling about Bernie. Burn never asks me to share their contact information, and the campaign will never try to reach out to my friends on my behalf. It's important that I do not guess how my friends feel about Bernie. If I do not know how a friend feels about Bernie, I can send them my digital Burn survey to find out. Ahead of Election Day, the campaign will send me my friends' voting locations, so I can make sure all of my friends know when, where, and how to vote or caucus for Bernie. Next, I share my Bernie story with people who are on the fence about Bernie. Sharing my personal story and actively listening to others is the best way to persuade people to support Bernie. Lastly, I use Burn when I get together with a group of volunteers to talk about Bernie at a public spot in my neighborhood, like the subway station or a farmer's market, or while I go about my daily life. When a stranger compliments me on my Bernie shirt, I make sure to add them to Burn so the campaign can follow up with them about voting.
Burn is the revolutionary app that puts the power of organizing our personal networks for Bernie right in our pockets. You can search for Burn, B-E-R-N, the official Bernie 2020 app, right now in the Apple app or Google Play stores. This is how we build our movement, put Bernie in the White House, and transform our country. So if you're watching this video, you're really similar to Bernie. As you may know, Bernie's own political journey began as a young person when he was fighting against segregation in the Chicago public schools and fighting against racist housing policies at his university. And there are two main things that he learned from his student organizing experiences. First, change only happens when people come together to fight for a shared vision. And second, young people are incredibly powerful. All throughout history, young people have been at the forefront of social movements, and our political revolution will be no different. He personally understands how important students are, each and every single one of you. He knows that our victory is dependent on you. It comes down to this. There are 20 million voting-age students in America, and less than 30 million people voted in the 2016 Democratic primary. We know that students and young people are the most driven and progressive demographic in our country, and because our futures and our planets are at stake, if each and every single one of us votes for Bernie, we will win by a landslide. Most political campaigns don't invest in young people because they know that students don't have a lot of money and because they don't reliably turn out to vote. We're not going to let that happen this time. We have to fight for Bernie, for this grassroots movement, and organize millions of our friends to do the same, just like our lives depend on it, because they do. We have a huge goal of talking to every single voter at every single school in America. This is huge and absolutely unprecedented. After you finish adding all the people that you know into the Burn app, you need to use the Burn app to talk to every single person at your school that you do not yet know. After you finish adding all the people that you know into the Burn app, you will use the Burn app to talk to every single person at your school that you do not yet know. What's great about campus canvassing is that you do not need a huge crew to take action with you. Even if it's just you at a table or walking up to people in the quad, library, or cafeteria, you should celebrate that as a success. We are building a historic grassroots movement with the largest and most effective student organizing effort our country has ever seen. Thank you for being a part of history.
As you're signing up to do this work today, don't forget about the stakes of this election, or think that you can always get involved later on in the process.
Every day that we have until primaries and caucuses start in February is a day we cannot afford to waste. And we're not just building the grassroots movement that will make Bernie our nominee.
We are laying the groundwork and building the organization
that we're going to need to run the largest turnout operation in history to defeat Donald Trump, and then to build the political will everywhere across this country to enact Bernie's agenda.
It's going to take a movement of millions of people in the streets after Bernie becomes president to pass Medicare for all.
It's going to take a movement to enact a Green New Deal and create 20 million jobs.
And to defeat the NRA and end the epidemic of gun violence. And to enact college for all, criminal justice reform, immigration reform, and restore our democracy, and more.
So don't procrastinate on this or assume it's going to be easy. Remember, the billionaires and the Wall Street executives do not want us to win.
The fossil fuel executives don't want us to win.
The health insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry don't want us to win. The political establishment and the lobbyists and the big money consultants, they don't want us to win.
And they have a lot of money and power at their disposal to get what they want.
They're going to throw a lot at Bernie and try and stop our movement.
This is a winnable fight. If we as a movement can set our sights on victory and do the hard work over the next few months and weeks, we can make Bernie our Democratic nominee, defeat Donald Trump, and get to work transforming this country. Why? Because there are more of us. And as Bernie always says, when we come together and get organized, we can transform this country. So let's do it.
This is Betsy DeVos, Jeff Bezos, all the other billionaires, the pharmaceutical companies. This is us.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
Hello everyone, my name is Amal.
Hi, my name is Brandon.
My name is June.
Hello, I'm Sage. I'm 16 years old, and my stepfather is a victim of the military-industrial complex.
I too have incurred thousands of dollars in student loans.
A few years back, I broke my ankle in 3 places, and I was underinsured at the time.
And I have a disability.
We had been giving the insurance company thousands upon thousands of dollars through insurance premiums. We still couldn't afford to get my sister an insulin pump.
Although I was born here in the US, I lived all my childhood in Yemen. In fact, my close and extended family are still there right now, facing a 4-year war and a humanitarian crisis.
Around 4 years ago, he was imprisoned on a nonviolent drug charge, and he almost certainly received a stricter charge because he is a black man.
This election isn't about politics, it really is a battle for survival.
This is millions and millions of people coming together, demanding they have their voices heard. And I'm one of those millions.
The only way we bring about the change that this country needs is when millions of people stand up and demand it. That's the only way that change ever takes place. That's the history of the civil rights movement. That's the history of the labor movement. That's the history of the women's movement. That's the history of the gay movement. That's the history of the environmental movement. Real change never takes place without struggle.
If there's one thing that brings me hope, it's when I see a Bernie rally and I see young, old, black, white, Latino, gay, trans. I see them fighting for a revolution.
Enough is enough. The United States needs someone with consistency and a backbone to to take on Trump and the large corporations going into the 2020 campaign.
What do we know about the 1%? They are 1%. I may not be a great mathematician, but I did learn in elementary school that 99% is a hell of a lot more than 1%. Yeah. All right.
I believe if we'd had Medicare for All in 2006, there's a very good chance that my mom would still be around today.
If Bernie is elected, my family and the Yemeni people will have hope again that the war can stop.
Bernie's Medicare for All bill put into place, my sister would be able to get the insulin pump she has waited nearly 2 years for.
There are a lot of solutions to a lot of our issues in this country, but none of them will ever be resolved unless we begin with a political revolution.
I invite you to join us, to join Bernie 2020 in your state, and try to make a difference, because no American should have to be faced with these choices that we're faced with daily.
So let's do it. Let's run a historic grassroots campaign. And when we do that, the 1% can spend all of the money that they want. We're going to beat them.